All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
I have had many experiences with spirits. This is one of them. This happened a long time ago when I was still in school. One day while I was in class, I had to go to the bathroom. When I walked into the bathroom, I could tell no one was in there because all the stall doors were opened. I went into the stall at the very end. While I was doing my business, I heard crying. I was super confused at first because I thought no one was in there. I looked under the stalls, which I know is kind of creepy. When I looked, I saw someone's feet a few stalls down from mine. They weren't wearing shoes, and their skin was more of like a blue color. Then I saw them walking out of the stall, continuing to cry. Even though I wasn't finished what I was doing, I quickly pulled up my pants and walked out of the stall. Mostly because I was scared, but I also wanted to make sure that person was okay. When I got out of the stall, no one was there. I know no one left or came in because the door to the bathroom is very squeaky and loud. I was so scared that I couldn't even go back into the stall to finish. I quickly washed my hands and left. In my school, there's a locker that has a memorial on it of someone who died. To this day, I still wonder if that was the same person I saw in the bathroom or someone else. I still wonder what that spirit was crying about, and genuinely hope they are okay and have moved on.
So, this is a longer one, and at this point in time, I had stopped being fazed by ghostly encounters, so this was more cool to me than it was scary. My old school was painfully haunted, even though it only has about 150 kids per year, and no one seemed to notice when something shifted or when it felt like someone was right behind you staring you down. This experience happened a few years ago, but I remember it vividly. There was a school dance coming up. My best friend and I were chatting about it in the math room. As someone who looks people right in the eye when they talk, I don't often pay attention to my peripheral vision, but something caught my eye. Sure enough, when I took a glance behind her, there he stood, dressed in one of those suits with the ruffle waistcoats and no head. He stood facing me, but it looked as if his head had been chopped clean off. My friend, knowing I see stuff, asked me what was up. I shook my head and pretended that it didn't happen. The boy didn't make me feel off in any way, so I wasn't too concerned. That Friday was the dance. It was the end of the night, and everyone had left the gym, but my best friend and I. I glanced up just for a moment, and walking across the gym about 10 meters away was the headless boy. I watched him head towards the door before I turned to my best friend and asked her if she had seen him. She hadn't. I've been researching ever since, and I can't find anything about a beheading so clean. There were a few brutal unsolved murders here and there, like any small, unassuming town would have, but nothing about this. Not even a legend. Or a memory from the seniors.
When I was 17, I started out into the world on my first big adventure. I'm a Christian and decided I wanted to expand my knowledge of the Bible and ministry, so I attended a 10-month ministry school program. I didn't want to be a theologian or anything, so one school year was perfect as opposed to a 4-year theological college. It's been 13 years, but I remember everything as if I'd gone through it this year. I was so excited. I was going to be living in a dorm, 4 hours from my home, so it was sort of like moving out on my own, without having to actually be alone. I settled in quickly, met my roommate, and started preparing for a year of fun, growth, and overall self-advancement. At least, I thought that was how the year was going to go. I've always been sensitive to the other side. I've had a connection to the afterlife and spiritual and paranormal beings for as long as I can remember. It isn't out of the ordinary for me to see shadow figures, feel the presence of those departed, and, on a few instances, I've spoken with the dead and not even realized it. Once when I was a child, I remember talking to a man on a bench. My mum asked me who I was talking to, and I told her, a nice man. It wasn't until years later when I mentioned the memory, she told me that no one was on that bench with me. Anyway, enough sidetracking. The school year started normal, but certain areas of the building always gave me an unsettling feeling. There was a closet space in our floor's hall that was always unnaturally dark, even when the hall lights were on. I never actually saw anything there, but I felt eyes following me when I passed. It got to where I'd run past it to get to my room and slam the door as quickly as possible. There are 3 events I remember that happened directly to me. After those, I'll give a brief background on the building the school was in. The first event happened when I was almost late for curfew. It was past midnight, and I was supposed to be in my room by 2 a.m. Instead of climbing 4 flights of stairs, which I usually did, I chose to take the elevator. After that night, I never took it again. I was standing at the elevator, so tired and ready to just collapse, when the lights in the hall suddenly went out in both directions. The only lights left on were the light right above me, the exit sign to the right, and the lit up elevator arrow button. I looked to my left, nothing but a dark hall. I looked to my right, and it seemed to be a dark hall as well. Right as I was going to turn my head away, I saw a slight movement. I squinted, trying to make it out in the dim light. This was before cell phones had flashlights, so my flip phone was useless here. I stared as an uneasiness crept over me. The exit sign at the end of the hall seemed dull somehow, like it was being blocked by something dark and transparent. Panic rushed over me. The movement I'd spotted was on the ceiling, right in front of that sign. I started to press the elevator button over and over as what looked like a black smoke or mist crept along the ceiling slowly towards me. By the time it was about 5 feet away, the elevator finally opened and I rushed in, jabbing the closed door button as the sliding metal doors slowly pulled together. Just as they closed, the mist or vapor or whatever it was had finally made it to the door and began to fall slowly to the ground. I stabbed my floor number over and over as if it would get me to my floor faster. I finally made it to my floor, past the creepy dark closet area and into my room. I was borderline hyperventilating, and my roommate thought I was crazy. The next instance was probably more terrifying than the first. We had weekly dish duty at this school. 2 people would be assigned every week to clean up dishes at the end of each meal. The week I was assigned went without a hitch for the most part, until the last night. The guy I was assigned to clean the kitchen with couldn't make it. The way it usually went, one person cleaned pots and pans and wiped down tables. The other did all the cups, plates, cutlery, bowls, etc. Since he wasn't able to be there and failed to find someone to cover for him, I had to do everything myself, being the little pushover that I was back then. Just to give a bit of layout to the room, it was big. There were lines of white fold-out plastic tables and chairs. The tables were in 5 rows of 3, end to end. The hall leads right into the room with no doors, just the open wall that was probably 10 by 10 feet. When you come in that opening, you see all the tables, and directly in the middle of the far wall were 2 double doors going into the kitchen. They were wood and had a round window on the top of them, face level for a normal height person. Directly to the left of this door was a hole in the wall, where everyone would sit their dirty dishes. On the other side of that hole was the dishwashing room for the dishes used by students. You would go through the doors, turn left, and boom, there's your dish pile for the night. The pots and pans were washed at the back corner of the industrial kitchen. When I started washing dishes for the night, there were still people in the eating area talking, doing homework and playing games. When I finished the pots and pans and came to the window room, there were less people, but still a fair amount. I started the rest of the dishes. By the time I was almost done, I saw the cafeteria lights shut off, which meant the last person was leaving the room. No big deal. I'd been in here in the dark tons of times. Another half hour or so, and I was done with dishes. I looked at the clock. It was around 12:30. I was so ready to go to bed, but had to finish the tables. I heard something in the back of the kitchen fall. Upon investigation, it was a box of cookies. I picked them up, and that is when I began to feel eyes on me. I felt like I was being watched, and the unmistakable feeling of dread covered me. I set the cookies on the shelf they'd fallen from, and rushed out of the kitchen doors to clean tables. Windows lined the two side walls of the room, so the street lamps lit the tables pretty well as I quickly cleaned them. I was half through with the tables when I heard the cookies fall again. I stopped and listened intently for any other sounds. Silence. I slipped into the kitchen, holding my breath, and ran to the pantry. Sure enough, that box of cookies was on the ground again. I picked them up, this time laying them down so they wouldn't fall again, and rushed out of the kitchen, still feeling uneasy. I went back to my table, cleaning, and after a few minutes I froze dead in my tracks. There, through the window to the dish room, I saw it. A big, shadowy mass, standing there, watching. I'd seen shadow figures before, so this wasn't new to me. The thing that was new is the specific feeling I got as I stared into what I perceived to be its face. I walked out of the little room, as though to head into the kitchen. I just had to pep talk myself at this point. Okay girl, just wipe these last tables and you're good to go. You got this. Just keep your eyes down. I got to the last table and heard the cookie box again. Okay, there's nothing there. Just run, grab the box, throw it on the shelf and book it. That was my plan. I wiped the last table and turned to the door to put my plan into action, and my stomach felt like it dropped, slam into the floor. In the left door window I saw what was watching me. A shadowed face with two deep dark holes for eyes and a gaping mouth. I screamed bloody murder and booked it to my room. I didn't even put my cleaning supplies away. I flew up those 4 flights of stairs faster than I ever had. I thought for sure it would follow me. My roommate wasn't there this evening, so I threw on the lights as I slammed the door and started to sob uncontrollably. I slept with every light on that night and made sure to never stay out of my room after nightfall again. The last event, in my opinion, wasn't as bad as those two. I still felt uneasy in certain parts of the building and like I was being watched. Specifically in the hall, the downstairs bathroom, the laundry room, just to name a few. But nothing of substance really happened in those places. The last event was in my room. There were intercoms in every room that were no longer in service. We knew that they didn't work, but one evening I heard a woman's voice coming out of ours, followed by an elderly male-sounding voice. They were having a bit of an argument. She kept saying something about him needing to take his medicine, and he was refusing. This conversation carried on about 30 seconds, then static and silence. I shrugged it off and kept on about my business. After the voices, I started to dig into what this building used to be. before they made it into a ministry school. It was a nursing home. The conversation I heard could have been between a nurse and a patient that lived here. Not only was this place a nursing home, it has some kind of historical connection to the Freemasons. When the renovation crew was getting it ready to turn the building into a school, they knocked out a bottom floor brick wall that was crumbling. Some of the bricks had the Freemasons' insignia on them. They piled the bricks and began laying new ones when a van stopped at the edge of the property, and a group of 10 or so middle-aged and elderly people walked to the pile and each took one brick with the symbol on it and climbed back into the van and drove off. The man who told me about this said they seemed like they were in some kind of trance or something, blank stares, chanting something he couldn't distinguish. He said it was the most terrifying thing he's witnessed. Before this building was a nursing home, it was a meeting and living place for Freemasons. I'm not sure of everything that went on there, but something happened to give it all the dark and ominous goings on. When I graduated, I never stepped foot in that building again. It is now out of business. A lot of paranormal things have happened to me since this, but this is the haunting experiences that I had at my Christian ministry school.
So, I was laid off work a couple of months ago, and I was lucky enough to find something temporary as a custodian at my in-laws' school. So for the last week or so, I've been having strange occurrences while working. I can go in at my own time and finish whenever, which works for me. I prefer to work alone anyways. I started to go in at around 8 PM and I would finish at around midnight or so. For the first few nights, nothing happened. I did my work and I would set the alarm, lock up, and leave. Then one night, about a week and a half ago, I started to hear some noises down the hall. Footsteps. Now I was sure I was alone, but with the alarm deactivated, anyone with a key could come in, a teacher or another one of the custodians. So I could hear these footsteps down the hall getting louder and closer to the room I was in. And when it sounded like someone would have been right at the door, it just stopped. So I look out the door and down the halls and call out. No response. I was a little freaked out, but I just brushed it off. Later, that same night, I went into another classroom and immediately felt strange, a little lightheaded, and it was cold in there. Right as you walk in, you can feel the temperature drop, but it was an eerie feeling I had. I started cleaning, wiping down the desks, and putting them in the corner, since there was no more school. As I was putting away the last desk, I noticed that one of the desks was in the opposite corner to all the others that I had moved. I moved it back and went to go grab the mop and bucket that was outside the classroom door, and as I walked back in, I noticed that the desk is back in the same corner. I left the room and turned off the lights and closed the door, and I left the building. I was scared. I know I was alone. But as I exited the building and headed towards my car, I saw the room that I was in. The lights were on, and I could see a woman in there, clear as day, looking right at me. I was not going back in there that night. I let several days go by. I was finishing up all the other classrooms, and I would constantly hear footsteps down the hall. My cleaning supplies would be moved from one place to another, and I could feel that someone was watching over me. It was so uncomfortable. Just last Friday was my last day, and I only had 2 rooms left. The one I ran out of, and the adjacent room. So I started with the adjacent room. Nothing weird about it. Until I was just about done, I could hear a faint cry or moaning coming from the hall. And all I could think of was, "You've got to be kidding me." My hair stood up, and I froze. I'm about to leave the room, but there was no way I was going to go out into the hall, hearing someone crying. It was 5 minutes. I stood there listening. I finally decided. It's now or never. I grabbed my cleaning supplies, and I headed out of the room. I took just one step into the hallway, and it stopped. Relieved, I turned back and locked up the classroom door. The classroom I had been avoiding was untouched, except the one desk. I was in and out with no further incidents, thankfully. I was done with my work, never needing to go back. I had my mother-in-law over for dinner, and she works as a teacher in that same school, so I asked her if she's ever had any strange things happen to her. She said, "Oh yes, many staff has," she said. She tells me that there was a cemetery that was moved about 12 years ago, that was visible right from the kids' park, and since the move, there had been strange happenings in and around the school grounds. I told her what had happened to me while working there, and she starts crying. I wasn't sure why, but she gathers herself, and she tells me that about 10 years ago, that was her class. And around that time, she had an EA teacher's assistant. She committed suicide in that classroom. She hanged herself, and it was my mother-in-law who found her the next morning. I made my mother-in-law cry when I described the woman I saw in the window. I felt horrible, but at the same time I was sad. I probably should have been afraid, but what can I do? Knowing what I know, I might go back one day.
My school is definitely haunted. I don't want to say the name just in case anyone here got accepted in or looking into it. Anyways, I had heard some stories about the school, but not a lot, just for the same reason that the school doesn't want to scare away any potential students. My first experience was when I was sitting down in the student lounge, and I was studying, when I felt like I was being watched. So I looked up and I saw a shadow across from me, and it suddenly rushed towards me, and I just froze. I then picked up all my stuff and threw them in my backpack and walked out as fast as I could. Another was when I was in the bathroom alone and heard the door from the stall next to me open. I looked under to see if I could see feet, but I didn't see anything, just the door closed. My favorite experience was when I volunteered to check in students to go into the school dance. I was outside, taking a break, when I heard a little child's voice say, "Excuse me," and I thought, who brought a kid here? So I turned around, and no one was there, just some guys leaving the dance. So I moved spots and proceeded to scroll through my phone again, when I heard, "Excuse me," again. I turned around, and no one was there. All of these experiences happen around the original older buildings of the school. The first building that you see when you come into the school is not in use, so it has broken windows, locked gates and doors. I would always walk by that building to get to my car, and I always saw people in the windows. There is a gated hallway that is very dark, but you can kind of make out what's inside when you get close to the gate. I saw people standing at the end of the hallway. All of them were still. I also heard a giggle and a whimper when I was on my way to class. Sometimes, my friends and I would hear a scream of a woman around 7 to 8 p.m. while we were in class. As soon as we would hear it, we would peek out the window, but no one would be there. The original old main building was built like a maze. I and other people have had this feeling of being trapped, and it's just creepy inside. These are not all, but some of the stuff I have seen and heard at school.
A few years back, I was working as a music teacher at a primary school in Manchester. The building was quite old, and I had been told it was used as a hospital during World War II, but how true this is, I'm not sure. I've always believed in the paranormal, after witnessing many things growing up in my parents' house. Because I live quite a distance from the school, to avoid traffic, I would leave for work at 5:45 a.m. I'd be at work for 6:30 a.m. But if I'd left 15 minutes later, I'd be stuck on a motorway for 2 hours. It was crazy, but I got my preparation done before most teachers got in, and I could relax. I was always the first person apart from the cleaners at the school, and it was usually dark in the morning, but I never felt or sensed anything, or felt scared. My music equipment room was downstairs in the basement, and here I'd have to go down 2 flights of stairs and switch the lights on, as it was pitch black. You went down the stairs, and at the bottom there was an old toilet room, immediately at the bottom to the left. This was mostly used for storage. The only other way to go was down a small corridor to the right. Halfway down was my room. At the end was an art store room. In the mornings, sometimes I would go down to my room and play drums before getting my equipment for the first lesson. I never heard or saw anything during that time. One lunchtime I was in the music room, and I needed the toilet, so I went to use the one in the basement that was used for storage. As I was flushing the toilet, I heard high-heeled shoes walking down the stairs. I was washing my hands, and I popped my head out to check who it was, and clearly saw a woman with her hair in a bun, a 2-piece tweed-type jacket and a skirt walking towards my room. I dried my hands and went to see what the person, who I was sure with how she was dressed was the deputy head, wanted from me. I walked into my room expecting to see her, but nobody was there. I thought she must have gone to the art room, so I walked the short distance and opened the door. Again, nobody there. There was only one way in and one way out of the basement, and nobody came back past me. I must admit, I was a little bit scared. I checked again. Nobody there. I went upstairs, and that is where the deputy head's office was. I popped my head in and asked her if she had been down to the basement, but she hadn't, and she clearly wasn't wearing tweed, nor did she have her hair in a bun. I went to the staff room and said to a colleague and friend that I thought I'd seen a ghost. I described what I'd seen, and she told me to go and tell a specific member of staff. I went and told this teacher that I thought I'd seen a ghost, and he immediately asked if she was wearing a 2-piece tweed jacket and skirt, and had her hair up in a bun. I was shocked. He told me that he'd seen her on the 2nd floor hall, outside of his classroom on a few occasions, when he was working late. I was told that the caretaker and some cleaners had seen her too. Safe to say, it took a while for me to venture down to the basement first thing in the morning to play drums for some time. I've had so many other experiences at my parents' and friends' houses, but this is the only actual full apparition I've seen to date.
I was 16 years old and already at boarding school for roughly 5 years. My boarding school was situated in buildings that were originally used as a convent for priests and was also used as a graveyard in the Middle Ages. It has now been around for over 170 years as a school, going through 2 world wars, during which it was also used as a field hospital by the German army. Now, the thing you should know about the boarding school is that it was located in 2 large buildings, separated by a large playground. The boarding school itself was located on the top floors of each building, separated by 3 floors to reach the ground floor. I didn't have good grades that year and was moved over to the other building of the boarding school with the junior years to be under a stricter routine with longer study hours. We always had about 1 hour and 15 minutes every evening to relax and spend time with friends after studying. For that, there was a large basement with a small TV room, with a bar and a gigantic room with pool tables and kicker tables. The thing about the gigantic room was that it only had a single light switch, and it was connected to the school's theatre and dancing room, of which the doors were always locked and its light always closed. Besides that, there was also a door that was always locked and supposedly connected the two buildings on the school's premises with a tunnel. Now, that evening, I went down to the basement directly after studying, taking along my phone charger. It was a pretty uneventful night, and at the end of it, I went up the stairs, going up 3 floors, finally reaching my room. All of a sudden, I realized that I forgot my charger in the basement and ran up to the supervisor who gave me the keys so I could go down to the basement. Once I was descending the 3 floors to reach the basement, I started to get this eerie feeling, like I was being watched. The feeling got even worse once I realized that if I would scream, nobody would hear me, as there were 3 empty floors between myself and the boarding school. Once I reached the basement level, I was calm again, unlocking the first door and opening the second one. As I slowly opened the second door, it felt as if the darkness in the gigantic room was extremely thick, as if it would swallow me. I know it sounds weird, but that's how it felt. I switched on the lights and started making my way past the ping pong tables towards the back of the gigantic room. Roughly 30 meters away from the door and the only light switch. As I made my way to the back, I was suddenly taken over by a massive sense of danger and terror. I felt as if I was being ambushed or led into a trap, and my heart rate skyrocketed. I quickly turned around and speed walked back to the door, when suddenly, all the ping pong tables were making extremely loud noises, as if people were slamming on them with their fists to stir up a fight. I started sprinting to the door in fear that someone might switch off the lights or close the door on me. And while I was getting closer to the door, the noise got louder and louder. Once I finally reached it, I switched off the light and slammed the door shut. And as soon as the door closed, the noise stopped. I quickly locked the door and ran up as fast as I could, as if my life depended on it, crashing into one of the supervisors making his way home at the end of the night. He asked me what was going on, as I was pale, sweaty, and shaking, and I told him what I experienced. Instead of trying to rationalize what happened, the first thing he said is that he experienced some scary things as well when he had to lock up the basement alone. He also told me to check with another supervisor to make sure nobody was down there. The other supervisor and I went down to the basement again and stopped at the locked door, trying to hear if someone was down there or if any student was messing around. We listened quietly and heard someone walking around. As soon as we opened the door, the noise stopped and we turned the lights on, but nobody was there. Nevertheless, the back doors of the dancing room and theater were wide open. To this day, I get chills thinking back to this experience. Nobody could have been down there with me without me noticing it, nor can I explain away the slamming noises coming from the ping pong tables and pool tables. It's an experience that has never left me, and although I tried to rationalize it, it is haunting me in a way. What could it have been is what I am wondering now.
So at the start of my junior year of high school, I had a weird week of experiences that still freak me out a bit. It started slowly. I would be in class and I would hear a voice that sounded familiar. It would say my name whenever I was doing work. I would look to where the voice came from, and it was either a wall or some different kid in my class that I didn't talk to and had no reason to. Definitely weird, and it happened a few times a day, but I chalked it up to stress or perhaps being tired. It happened for a few days like this until, while I watched my friend practice basketball because I had a free hour, I started to notice a figure out of the corner of my eye. It looked like it had long black hair and darkish clothing, but I could never make out any real features beside that. As I went to turn to look, it would be gone. it would always be a ways away from me, at the bottom of the bleachers, just seeming to look up at me. It continued happening for a few days like that, and despite the creepiness of it, I never felt scared or worried. After that school week though, it just abruptly stopped. I didn't hear my name anymore or see the figure looking at me. I know looking back, I wasn't super stressed, and I don't have any mental problems that would cause delusions or anything like that. I still have no clue what was going on, but I figured it was a story that would belong here.
My mum is convinced that the boarding school she works at is haunted. Honestly, I am too. There's multiple instances of paranormal happenings. I'll write them all down. She was driving with one of her co-workers, and they were passing this field, and she said she saw this lady in a black cloak in the middle of the night. They reversed the car to get another look, and she's gone. Co-worker, I think the one from before, saw the lady in black in the pool house. Someone heard kids playing in the pool in the middle of the night. They went to check and found it empty. Her friend had windows randomly open. She'd go and close them, and they'd open again. All of a sudden the room bursts open and papers go everywhere. In one of the dorms, my mum says she saw this lady in a nightgown walking between rooms. She also said when she was in the dorm alone one time, the door sensors just randomly went off. They have sensors on the doors, so like if a kid tries to run away. Her friend was walking somewhere and saw someone waving from one of the dorm windows. Turns out there's no group in there, so nobody was in the dorm at the time. One of the buildings used to be a house, and in the living room the old owner used to smoke cigars. You can still smell them when you go in the room. Same friend, I think, who saw the waving person, used to have dreams about this little boy on a tricycle, only to find out that the old owner of the property used to visit when he was a child and ride around on a tricycle. I'm sorry, there's so many, I literally was only going to type the first two.
At my school, there's an unused classroom we call the desk graveyard. What that means is that it's basically a storage room with a huge amount of desks in it. There are lots of rumors about the desk graveyard. It's said that sometimes you can hear certain sounds coming from the desk graveyard, even when there isn't anyone in there. Since the desk graveyard was on the first floor, we guessed the noise was coming from the second floor. The library is above it though, and the sounds we would hear from it would be running, rummaging, and thumping. Since students wouldn't be in the library whilst we were in regular class time, we started to wonder just what was going on in the desk graveyard. One time, this kid from my class had something wrong with his desk. It was wobbling or something. He was told by the teacher to go and exchange it. He said that when he got to the desk graveyard, he heard the same sounds we had all heard, but up close. I was tempted to think it was an earthquake or something, but the kid was adamant it wasn't. He quit picking out a new desk and hurried back to class. He came back white as a ghost and convinced something paranormal was going on in that room. It's so weird that no one ever goes in there. Not even the cleaner. Since no one goes in there, I guess it doesn't really need to be cleaned all that often. But once the cleaner was cleaning the corridor in front of it, and he said that he heard a horrible rattling sound coming from in there. He thought maybe it was the wind, but the windows were closed. The cleaner at our school had been there for a very long time. He was actually a former student. I asked him what he knew about the desk graveyard. And he said, even when he was a kid, the same room was used for storing desks and nothing more. And no one was allowed in there without good reason too. He said that there were similar rumors about that room when he was a boy, I don't know the truth of this matter, but what he told me chilled me to the bone and made me never want to go into the desk graveyard alone again. He said that before it was used to store desks, and before it was even a building, there was a pond in its place. When the school was built on these grounds, the decision was made to fill in the pond. It wasn't a big pond, but it was an incredibly deep pond. In days gone by, a young girl lost her life in the murky depths of the pond. Therefore, the kids, who the cleaner went to school with, all blamed the noises and strange goings-on on a ghost. The ghost of the girl who lost her life in the pond. I often wonder aloud what that little girl is trying to communicate, if anything. Are you just trying to make us aware of your existence? And you just want to let us know that you're there? Or are you still wanting to play with some children of your age? Either way, I don't want to go anywhere near the desk graveyard. It makes me nervous.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.